You begin realizing that what you thought was your great capacity for love was often an unconscious contract to keep the peace. There comes a moment when the burden of carrying the emotional weight of an entire room, a workplace, or a marriage becomes psychologically insupportable. You notice it first not as a grand revelation, but as a subtle physical fatigue, a sudden heaviness in the limbs when a certain person enters the room, or a feeling of emptiness after a conversation that was supposed to be intimate. For years, you have operated under the assumption that your sensitivity to the distress of others was a moral virtue, a gift of profound empathy that set you apart and allowed you to preserve harmony. But when you sit quietly in an empty room, away from the demands of those who rely on your emotional availability, a cold observation begins to take shape in your awareness. You realize that your constant vigilance, your immediate perception of another person's shifting mood, and your instinctive desire to soothe their unexpressed tension was not entirely an act of selfless generosity. It was an elaborate defense mechanism designed to control your environment by keeping everyone else regulated. The moment you stop absorbing that psychic force, the entire structure of your relational world begins to shudder, and you are left with the uncomfortable task of examining what you have actually been participating in. This deep emotional receptivity is not a spiritual achievement, but a psychological condition of porous boundaries, where the line between the self and the collective psyche has become dangerously blurred. When you are constantly attuned to the unexpressed pain of those around you, you are engaging in a form of unconscious identification, taking the split off, rejected material of another person and allowing it to live within your own psychological house. I have often observed this dynamic in individuals who pride themselves on being the emotional anchor for everyone in their orbit. You attend a social gathering, and without a word being spoken, you instantly detect the hidden resentment between a husband and wife, or the unstated envy of a colleague who congratulates you with a smile that does not reach their eyes. Instead of allowing that effect to remain with its rightful owner, your consciousness immediately moves to absorb it, acting as a psychological sponge that dries up the discomfort of the room at your own expense. People become deeply attached to the version of you they learned how to navigate, precisely because your presence spares them the necessity of facing their own internal discord. When you are always there to catch the heavy projection, they never have to feel the weight of their own shadow, and you are rewarded with the persona of the compassionate savior, a mask that feels noble but eventually suffocates the person wearing it. The discomfort deepens when you begin to notice the unspoken power exchanges that govern these relationships, revealing that human beings always adapt to access. When you decide to stop carrying this psychic energy, you are not merely taking a rest. You are disrupting a hidden economy of dependence and control. Think of a specific interaction, perhaps a phone call from a relative who always uses your ear to deposit their anxieties, or a friend who only seeks you out when their life is in chaos. You notice that when they finish speaking, they seem lighter, almost relieved, while you hang up the phone feeling depleted, irritable, and strangely anxious. What has occurred is a literal transfer of affect, where their unmanaged tension has been projected into you, and because your boundaries are porous, you have accepted the deposit. The moment you refuse this transaction, perhaps by offering a polite but detached response instead of your usual deep emotional involvement, the tone of the relationship shifts instantly. The other person does not praise your new boundaries. Rather, They become cold. They accuse you of being distant, or they subtly imply that you have become selfish. Your silence reveals their hunger for control, and you are forced to see that their affection was entirely contingent upon your willingness to serve as their emotional containment vessel. Beneath this pattern lies a hidden mechanism that is rarely acknowledged by the sensitive individual, a truth that is far more unsettling than the simple narrative of being used by others. To understand why you have spent a lifetime carrying everyone else's pain, you must look directly at the hidden motive of your own persona. For the helper who cannot admit exhaustion is always hiding an intense fear of their own insignificance. By becoming the one who feels everything, the one who heals the unspoken wounds and anticipates every psychological need, you have constructed an identity that makes you indispensable. This is a subtle form of ego inflation disguised as humility, an unconscious belief that you possess the strength to bear what others cannot, which secretly places you in a position of psychological superiority. It is as if you are keeping a lamp burning in an empty room of an abandoned house, convinced that if you let the light go out, the darkness will swallow not just the room, but your entire existence. You have used the pain of others to avoid the terrifying emptiness of your own unlived life, finding a distorted sense of purpose in psychic slavery, because the alternative, standing alone in your own distinct individuality, requires a confrontation with your own deep loneliness. This continuous maintenance of the light in that empty room is a heavy tax on the personality, and it eventually drains the very libido, the vital psychic energy required to sustain your own life. When you look closely at this hidden mechanism, you find that your sensitivity has actually functioned as a shield against your own shadow, for it is much easier to manage the sorrow of a neighbor than to confront the cold, unlived ambition or the forbidden rage that accumulates in your own unconscious. Consider the sudden, unexplained irritation you feel when someone close to you makes a demand that is only slightly larger than usual, or the way a missed text message from a friend can trigger a wave of resentment out of all proportion to the event. That resentment is the voice of your own rejected instinct, the part of you that is tired of the performance, demanding to know why everyone else is allowed to have needs while you are only permitted to have ears. By absorbing the psychological debris of your environment, you have effectively paralyzed your own active will, choosing the passive safety of suffering over the dangerous responsibility of self-determination. You have played the part of the emotional shock absorber for so long that you have forgotten how to move under your own power, confusing the endurance of pain with the possession of character. The collapse of this illusion begins the moment you realize that your sacrifice has never actually redeemed anyone. You may recall a specific confrontation, perhaps a moment when you finally spoke the truth about a long-standing manipulation, only to watch the other person immediately adjust their mask, completely untouched by the depth of your insight. It is a profoundly unsettling revelation to discover that the people you were trying to save were not actually looking for transformation. They were merely looking for an outlet. Human communication is largely a negotiation for psychological comfort. And when you refuse to facilitate that comfort, the underlying contract is laid bare. You see that you have been complicit in a mutual deception, allowing others to remain unconscious of their own destructive patterns, while you enjoyed the moral vanity of bearing their consequences. This realization strips away the nobility of your suffering, leaving you with the cold fact that you have wasted vast amounts of psychic force defending a fiction. The world does not fall apart when you stop caring. Rather, It simply finds another place to deposit its weight, and you are left standing outside the circle of your accustomed relationships, stripped of your role and forced to look at the vacuum you left behind. This is where the pressure of individuation becomes acute, demanding that you withdraw your projections and accept the reality of your own psychological isolation. When you step out of the helper persona, you enter a state of consciousness that inherently separates you from the collective assumptions of those around you. You begin to see through the social performances that others take entirely seriously, noticing the subtle envy beneath their compliments and the hidden hostility disguised as polite concern. This heightened awareness is not a comfort. It is a heavy psychological burden that changes your relationship to solitude entirely, making it a necessary sanctuary rather than an unfortunate condition. You find yourself sitting in gatherings where the talk flows easily, yet you feel entirely remote, as though you are observing a strange ritual through a pane of glass. You cannot return to the comfortable blindness of the past, nor can you force others to see what their ego defenses are designed to hide. The psyche now demands that you commit to the development of your own distinct reality, even if that development requires you to walk away from the very people who once defined your worth. This withdrawal of emotional access is often interpreted by the collective as an act of hostility, but it is actually the first true act of psychological honesty you have performed. By refusing to receive the projections of others, you force them back upon their origin, compelling those around you to either face their own internal discord or find another container. You are no longer available to validate the illusions that keep their personalities stable, and this refusal makes you appear dangerous to their established order. You are left standing at a threshold, looking back at the house with the single lamp burning in the empty room, knowing that the light was never meant to guide anyone else home. It was only ever a marker of your own displacement, a sign that you were living in the secondary chambers of other people's lives instead of inhabiting your own. The door before you opens into an uncharted terrain where your sensitivity is no longer an instrument for social negotiation, but a private lens through which you must view your own destiny, with no guarantee of agreement from the world you leave behind.